Welcome to Nifty's Teacher Just-in-Time or pre-recorded webinar on teaching critical thinking through market research. We will look at the webinar objectives, review market research and its components, identify the 6 types of questioning around critical thinking, and then additional resources you might use in your classroom. Finally, we'll end with questions for you to consider beyond this webinar. What do you see? Do you see a duck or a rabbit or both? Either way, you're right. It's just based on your perception. That's the point of an optical illusion. It's a visually perceived image that is deceptive or misleading. This happens when information gathered by the eye disagrees with how our brain processes this information. So how does this connect to the Nifty classroom and critical thinking? As Nifty educators, we want to encourage our students to look past their knee-jerk or first response reaction and think more analytically to solve their problems more effectively. On this webinar, we'll look more specifically at the unit of learning of market research. And as a result of viewing this webinar, you will be able to explain the value of critical thinking as it relates to market research, identify existing curricular tools to teach critical thinking questioning, and then describe the benefits of questioning as part of the critical thinking process and how to use it more in the Nifty classroom. Let's do a quick review. Market research is an ongoing process that starts when students begin to evaluate their business ideas. It's important for an entrepreneur to do continual market research to make sure his or her product is relevant, competitive, and customer-oriented. When we think about market research, we tend to focus on identifying customers, but it's important to understand that it also includes looking at competition and the climate or business environment of the market that the student is entering. So how do we assess market research, and what kinds of activities do we use to teach each component of market research? Well, for market research around the customer, the business plan performance indicators that meet expectations are around students correctly identifying the industry name and size, a potential market size that is accurate and based on clear quantitative reasoning, and relevant demographic, geographic, and psychographic information about their customers that's also linked to their product or services, features, and benefits. In the 11th edition, this is related to Chapter 7, Section 1. And to teach these concepts, we look at case studies, 3 to be exact. Ava's Edibles case study and the chocolate bar activity may be more familiar to most of you, but Jason Delgado, our Senior Director of Learning and Innovation, also developed a really fantastic case study called the Marbles case study that if you're unfamiliar with, you can check out on Nifty Connect. We assess student mastery in the area of competition around business plan indicators related to identifying 3 direct competitors and providing information about their prices, location, quality, and reputation, that a student is able to identify multiple indirect competitors and provide information about their prices, location, quality, and reputation, and finally, that the student at a minimum can state 3 clear and valid competitive advantages. Students learn about competitive advantage and competition in Chapter 7, Section 2. We have several competitive advantage activities around restaurants and also personal competitive advantages for students to do, as well as a case study on honesty's competitive advantage and social responsibility. Climate, or the business environment, is often the most difficult for us to be able to teach in many ways and also assess in the classroom because it's overarching and includes both information about the customer and the competitors as well as the general market. The business plan performance indicators that relate to meeting expectations is that students can identify short-term and long-term business goals that are attainable and time-bound, and that the goals and rationale are linked to market research. And similarly, that their challenges are insightful, relevant, and explicitly informed by market research. The curriculum connections for this section are related to all of Chapter 7, and can be highlighted really in Ava's Edibles case study, the chocolate bar activity, and the marbles case study, because all of these activities start from the development of questions and then how students can actually use those questions to validate a business solution or idea. In addition to learning entrepreneurial concepts, students also have the opportunity to explore and use their entrepreneurial mindset. Nifty's entrepreneurial mindset is made of entrepreneurial behaviors like goal orientation, future orientation, persistence, drive, being opportunity focused, and comfort with risk. These behaviors are complemented by important 21st century skills that we believe all entrepreneurs need. Looking at this list of indicators, which do you think we specifically see in the unit of learning, in the market research unit of learning? You could argue to some degree that really this entire unit encompasses many, if not all of these behaviors and skills. But for the purposes of this webinar, we're going to focus on critical thinking and market research. Nifty's entrepreneurial mindset measures look at critical thinking and problem solving and define them as the ability to analyze and evaluate major and alternative viewpoints, synthesize and make connections between information and arguments, and interpret information and draw conclusions based on the best analysis. Sound familiar? They're very similar to our business plan indicators and our expectations for students in all three categories of market research: customers, competition, and business environment or climate. So there's clearly a link between the market research unit of learning and critical thinking and problem solving. But that doesn't help us face our larger challenge of how to do that. Some of the challenges we face in our market research unit are around the fact that there's no formula. There's no one way to solve for market research questions or to identify those market research questions. Students need more time to think and time to test their thinking, specifically when they're trying to think critically and analyze information. And there's lots of ways to get to an end, including lots of sources of information, and we don't know if all those sources of information are correct. So part of it is ensuring that we start with a good and solid foundation. And the foundation of critical thinking is really around questioning. So where did it all begin? Can you guess who this is? It all started with this guy. Socrates, among others, is credited as one of the fathers of critical thinking and problem solving in teaching and learning. And what we call the Socratic method is a form of inquiry and discussion between individuals based on asking and answering questions to stimulate critical thinking, to validate hypotheses. The business plan in many ways is a hypothesis, and your market research is the analysis that helps to validate that hypothesis. The basis for the Socratic method, as many of you know, is asking questions. And sometimes these questions can be annoying. Annoying to students, annoying to teachers, because everybody just wants to get to the answer. Socrates had 6 types of questions: conceptual clarification, probing assumption questions, probing rationale questions, viewpoints, probing implication questions, and questions about questions. In the next slides, we'll review these 6 question types, the purpose behind them, some sample questions around them, and how you might use them in your market research activities. We'll focus here on the core activities in the market research unit of learning: Ava's Edibles case and the chocolate bar activity. If you're unfamiliar or can't remember some of these activities, please take a moment to review them, as we'll be covering them in the next 6 slides. Conceptual clarification questioning. The purpose of conceptual clarification questioning is to guide students to think deeper and get them to reason and validate through explaining their ideas or thinking. Questions you might use around this is, why are you saying that? What do you already know about this? How does that relate to what we've already been talking about? Now, these can be key in all units of learning, but specifically in market research and using the market research activities. In Ava's Edibles market research case study, students are asked to identify whether her questions require primary or secondary market research as a first step. So one of the challenges there is that that's not just cut and dry. It's not just one right answer. So whatever students do respond to that is making sure that they can actually understand by thinking about what the definitions of primary or secondary research are. Similarly, in the chocolate bar activity, in part 1 of that activity, students are tasked to develop a 6-question survey. So as they're developing their survey, getting them to think about what's important to know. What is the purpose of a survey? Asking them those kinds of questions can actually help students develop their market research questions more effectively and also validate their reasoning. Probe assumption questions. The purpose of this questioning is to challenge students to question their unquestioned beliefs or assumptions. Now, for those of you that have listened to webinars or participated in professional development around creative thinking, this is one of the key items that we talk a lot about, getting students to push beyond their assumptions. But it's also important in critical thinking, because critical thinking is based on reasoning, facts. So by getting students to actually question their own thoughts, you're getting them to think about reality and reason rather than what their feelings are. Questions you may ask are, do you agree? Yes or no? How did you choose those assumptions? Explain how or why. Using probe assumption questions in market research activities like Ava's Edibles could be around Ava's Edibles market research questions to begin with. So in the case, students are given 6 questions that Ava says are the most important market research questions to start with. But there's nothing that says that those have to be the questions she starts with. In fact, we'd want to sort of challenge students to think beyond those because we want them to use Ava's Edibles case as a model for their own business. Similarly, in the chocolate bar activity, we want students to question what their market is. Who is their market? Why do they assume that their market wants what they want in a chocolate bar? Because they're in the age group? The purpose of probe rationale questioning is to push students to defend their rationale rather than accepting it at face value. This can be a tremendous help to students to model what the business plan process will look like and what the competition will look like with real judges. Questions could include, what evidence is there to support what you are saying? Can you give me an example of that? Are these reasons good enough? One thing to note around probe rationale questions is that these can oftentimes be the ones that make students shut down the most. And you don't want for them to make students feel overwhelmed. So making sure that you pepper these throughout your class can be helpful, or even giving students an opportunity to write down answers to some of these questions before responding to the rest of the group can make it less daunting to students. You can use probe rationale questions in Ava's Edibles in the third part of the activity. In the first part, students look at her questions. They identify where they can, whether it's primary or secondary research method that they should use. And then the third part is really identifying where they will find this information. And in some classes, teachers will have students actually go online or go find resources to answer these questions. In those cases, you can ask students, how they identified where to find information. So was Wikipedia the best place for Ava to find out what license she needed? Why? Pushing them beyond sort of the first step. In the chocolate bar activity, in part 2, students take the research that they have collected from their surveys, and they actually have an opportunity to create a brand new solution. So here, students can really analyze their business solutions. Did they actually listen to what customers said? What's the reasoning? What are the concrete examples? Points into consideration is key to logical or rational thinking. And viewpoint questioning shows students that there are multiple viewpoints to consider and gives them an opportunity to actually weigh these or suggests that they weigh these equally. Sample questions around these could be, how could you look at that from another way? What are the strengths and weaknesses of this viewpoint? This can help students really, again, strengthen their position on their viewpoint because they are able to consider a question that someone else would have about their product or service. In the market research activities, this can be used for both Ava's Edibles market research case and the chocolate bar because none of the information that the students are collecting is black and white. How can they defend their thinking? And why is their thinking more correct potentially than someone else's? So you could actually take solutions that students find. Let's say in Ava's Edibles, one group says one thing is primary research. Her best way of finding licensing is primary research, and someone else says secondary. Well, you could actually have students debate out in the classroom, their different viewpoints, and then decide as a group, which viewpoint they agree with most. The purpose of probe implications questioning is to have students predict or forecast what will happen, and the consequences related to that. Sample questions could be, how does that fit from what we have learned before? What do you think will happen next? Why? In Ava's Edibles market research case, students are deciding between whether they should have Ava do primary or secondary research to find out information. In many cases, this can be either primary or secondary, but they have to find the best option. In order to find the best option, they need to consider how that will impact her time and her money for her business. In the chocolate bar activity, students choose to make a candy bar based on the data that they collect from their peers. You can ask students to consider what they imagine will happen to sales. What do they think will happen to expenses? Maybe their packaging will be more expensive. And to consider why that's important in the entire process, not just in market research, but also for the larger business. As an extension activity for the chocolate bar activity, once students have presented their solutions to the chocolate bar and assuming that, what are they assuming? Are they assuming that they will make more sales at the new price and at the new type of candy bar that they produce? Similarly, for the chocolate bar activity, students can consider what the implication will be by choosing to change their chocolate bar. Will it be more expensive to make? Will it be less expensive? Will it increase sales? Why is that important for them to consider? What's the purpose behind? In Ava's Edible market research case, we asked students to identify whether primary or secondary research options will work to find information. In many of these cases, it could be both. Here you can ask students to consider what impact her decision on whether she uses primary or secondary research, what impact that has on her time or money. In the chocolate bar activity, students can actually think about what will happen to sales by changing their chocolate bar. Why do they believe that? Why is that important? Type of questioning is questions about questions. The purpose of this, as reflective of the name, is reflexive, to challenge students to think about their own questions. Some sample suggestions could be, why did you or I ask that question? What else could this question lead us to? What does this question mean? In Ava's Edibles case study, you can actually have students identify and think about whether Ava's even asking the right question. Are those the key questions that she needs to answer in order to assess her market? Similarly, in the chocolate bar activity, part 1, you can have students analyze the questions that they develop for their surveys. In some classrooms, teachers choose to have students do different questions, and so you can actually have student groups reflect on each other's questions and ask them questions about their questions. The point of questioning isn't to follow sort of 6 steps of questioning, but to allow yourself to step back and let the students lead the conversation. In the very beginning, it's difficult with adults and students. But as you practice and you teach your students to ask questions, you can actually step completely back and don't need to be the person who just continues to ask the questions. Identifying key questions is just the tip of the iceberg on critical thinking. Take a look at these great resources to learn from fellow instructors on how to get students to lead classroom discussions in 10 takeaway tips to teach critical thinking. See examples of Socratic seminars in action on the Teaching channel, and learn more about alignments and ways to assess critical thinking and problem solving at p21.org and changingminds.org. Ways we suggest that you keep the conversation going. Think about how you can help your students learn to use the 6 types of questioning for their Nifty Pro class and for other classes. How could you use these as students work on their own market research components for their business plan? How could you use questioning to assess student critical thinking skills? What other tools or examples do you use in your classroom to enhance problem solving and critical thinking as it relates to market research? Post on Nifty Connect forums and see what other teachers are doing and saying. Thank you for listening to this webinar. We hope you found it useful and that you'll use it in your next Nifty classrooms. Our next live session is on managing the business plan presentation instruction. That's Thursday, February 20th, 7 to 8 p.m. Eastern Time. For Nifty resources and slides from this and other webinars, visit us at www.niftyconnect.org. And finally, for any follow-up questions or resources to share with the larger teacher group, please email Jason Delgado at jason.delgado@nifty.com.